I think more interesting than the COP and the reparations debate was in the past week in Norway. There was a huge debate that surfaced about one of the guys in Just Stop Oil in Norway called Stop Oljeletingen, Stop the Oil Search, something like that in English, who had been defacing the artwork, the sculptures in the Vigeland Park in Oslo, which is like a stone sculpture park from the 1940s. Not the Nazi 40s, but it finished in the 40s. So he defaced that with orange paint, water-based paint. Easily came off, but then for doing that, he was invited to a podcast, and then he was invited to the biggest Norwegian primetime television debate show on the NRK, on the state channel, to debate the use of sabotage and violence in the climate struggle, basically. And this guy is like 24 years old, and he's studying for the master degree in philosophy up at the NTNU University in Trondheim. So he's more like a philosopher looking into the future of the climate struggle. But of course, he was condemned for taking the V word in his mouth, the violence word, and all he really did was to say that they actually asked him the question: if you look into the future, do you think violence and sabotage will be used in the struggle in the future? And he basically said yes. And then they made these huge headlines in the newspapers: "This guy wants to use violence," blah blah blah. So the funny thing was, instead of asking some hard questions from our English friends for blowing up the fucking pipeline, the Nordstream pipeline, which was the biggest methane release ever from any single point in the history of man, or whatever, in the history of methane, where the Brits actually did use explosive violence in a climate-related attack on the energy pipeline. They go after this philosophy student who is basically doing only sort of softcore, Just Stop Oil style activism, which is easily fixed afterwards. You just basically water spray the sculptures in the park, and the painting comes off. So instead of asking some hard questions from the London military command for blowing up the pipeline in the Baltic Sea, they go after this little brat of 24 years who studies philosophy and tries to say whether or not there will be sabotage in the future. It's kind of strange.
It's amazing how quickly that story disappeared. The pipeline thing, it's just gone now.
Yeah, you had 3 different nations, Sweden, Denmark, and Germany, investigating it, and all of them more or less coming out and saying, yeah, we've investigated it, it was blown up, and we know who did it. Other than that, we don't want to comment anymore on that because national security. Yeah, so it's pretty clear it wasn't Russia, because they wouldn't hesitate to say, yeah, we found it was fucking Putin. So
yeah, proof if ever it were needed. But otherwise, that's the proof if ever it were needed that it wasn't the Russians. But again, I have conversations with people who do mention, the Russians blowing up their own pipeline, and you say, that the idea that happened is so absurd.
The propaganda model is strong and in effect. It's the system punches down on this 24-year-old student, and it creates a red herring of a distraction. And the irony is, of course, it doesn't acknowledge its own systemic violence that it visits on us every day. It's just more of the same.
Yeah, it's like the difference between a student saying may do in the future and so the MI6 or something saying or not saying, but having actually done 2 months ago, and the guys who actually did something 2 months ago, they don't want to talk about. They would, okay, that was explosive terroristic violence against Europe's main energy infrastructure. Move along, nothing to see here. We talked to this young student instead about what he might do 10 or 20 years from now. Yeah. That sounds fair.
I'm slightly embarrassed for having access to this information, but it looks like there's this bloke called Nick Hancock who's like a extremely corrupt political entity who was, I think, was like the health secretary in the UK during a certain recent lab leaked something. Was causing a few problems here and there. Anyway, this bloke's ended up on a reality show where the public can, vote for who gets to stay and who gets to go, and some sort of competition, and the winner is the person who remains, after the public votes these people out. But this bloke, who's allegedly responsible for however many deaths of people due to incompetence, irresponsibility, and possibly alleged corruption, is being propelled to the final of this TV show. It's really astonishing. So, and again, this is not the kind of news I tend to follow, but this is popped up on Twitter, and I'm embarrassed to say that I'm looking at Twitter, and I'm embarrassed to say that I know about Nick Hancock making the final of this TV show. But it was really encouraging. Yeah. Yes, Mick, I'm running to the countryside at the first possible opportunity, I think, and I've got to work out what plants and trees I can eat.
So what did this Nick guy do in relation to the pandemic?
Well, he was the health secretary, and I think one of the main things that he did was he sent elderly people with COVID to nursing homes to spread the disease to others, and allegedly is responsible therefore for a bunch of additional deaths that needn't have happened. Which again, at the moment, I'm ambivalent as to whether or not any of these narratives are sort of true or not. I've really got no idea. But anyway, the general perception is that this guy is responsible for making policy decisions that resulted in thousands of deaths. And I assume as well, all these like failed systems where they gave over billions of pounds for whatever it is, measures that were taken and that didn't do anything, or for buying this protection equipment that didn't work or didn't exist or didn't turn up or whatever it was. There was just like this huge like feasting at the trough scenario. But this guy was the health minister. So he's a very serious, not serious, but a very senior politician who's like been like publicly disgraced. And yet the public still votes for the guy on a TV show. Yeah, you can't really. That's the thing. I mean, I'm sort of at the time of Boris Johnson's tenancy in government. I sort of came to the conclusion that if he went and machine gunned a bunch of people in the street, that they'd still sort of go, oh, ha ha, he's such a charming rogue.
Yeah, there's such a proud tradition of that in the US. I mean, my favorite example is how much acknowledgement George H.W. Bush got because he dabbles in painting. What a lovable, likable guy, Just ignore what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. Or Rudy Giuliani on Singing with the Stars. It's just, it's a type of laundering of fascism, really.
It's incredible, though, why do people still fall? I mean, I suppose just the conditioning is so. I mean, again, this brings back the whole sort of conversation I've had with people since I was about 4 years old, which now, when I, what I'm saying and thinking is will yield the response in the normies of like, oh, so you know what's going on while we don't. Oh, you know everything. You're so clever, and you're saying that you know that this is going on. You're saying that we're brainwashed. You're so clever, blah blah blah. Yeah, I don't know. How do you know that, George? Am I making sense? There's that sort of what's going on. Yes, when George Bush is being lauded for his lovely paintings, is thought crime illegal? I don't know. Are you saying something there's more dodgy things than this being said on YouTube, isn't there?
No, I want to come to when you mentioned George Bush, I came across the project for the New American Century thing recently, and how they had signed off on this document prior to ever being in government. So there was 25 people signed the document for a project for the New American Century before George Bush got into power, and 10 of them ended up in George Bush's government. And then we had a number of things happened that, ended up with the war in Iraq and et cetera, et cetera. It just maybe brought me, because obviously Lord Yu was very good for looking into everything, but I didn't really have any insight on the malevolent side of the plantation, or the dark side, and there seems that there really is one. That's another reason for kicking sand in their faces, or in the gears, as Cornford said.
Yeah, Hugh, from what I've seen, talked a lot about the kind of managed situation, that we're faced with, and I just, it has a malevolent edge for sure, in my view.
So what are you doing about it?
Well, it's got malevolence and tyranny have got obsolescence built in. They need an increasing amount of energy to maintain this control. So this is the process. This is a process of self-destruction. I wouldn't even do anything.
Yeah, it's running itself off the cliff faster than I think any of us could make it go, in my view.
That doesn't mean that acts of personal importance, resistance, and isolated wild individuals are not excluded, but they're not something that. I mean, it's part of for your well-being. If you do things like that, is that you have to do them. But I don't think anything organized is actually desirable. And in the situation that MT is describing, it would be immediately divulged. And I mean, there's hardly any group that could avoid the scrutiny of the surveillance we have now. So it's either completely underground or isolated. But that's all. I think that's what Lord Hugh was saying too.
But I suppose I was more bringing it around like to kind of strategy for, like I mentioned about Lord Hugh saying earlier, for avoiding the flippening, whatever he meant by the flippening. Like, I mean, okay, personally, I would say, because Bob asked the question earlier, avoid the crossfire from my perspective. So get out of where the danger zones. So, if the lights go out and food supplies are being controlled, you probably be better off not needing to line up outside the soup kitchens, and be outside the areas of where there will be the most major protests and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree. And avoid being in jail.
You know, I totally agree with all that. And I think looking at the material, you know, just kind of personal and real impacts of these situations, of the system of control and the, you know, the depths of the cliff it's moving us all toward. I mean, all that's really important. But, you know, I also want to say, I think another interesting dynamic to me anyway is just, you know, there's something about dignity, about being able to make moral choices, you know, not with the hope of surviving or making it through this problem. I just think there's something about dignity that wild animals and native peoples embody that we've lost in our slave mentality, you know, that's been crushed from us in this plantation. And there's just something about kind of doing whatever little resistance you can get away with that just instills dignity, which I think alone is worth living for, worth fighting for. I just think that's really interesting.
With Corford. Okay, it's a good point, but at the same time, when the wildebeest sees the lion coming, he doesn't stand there with dignity for the lion to eat him.
Oh yeah,
He's gonna run. He survives for another day.
yeah. I mean, you got a point. Totally.
Is this the end?
I think everybody was muted, or they thought it was the end. I was just renewing the live stream license, so feel free to just carry on.
Isn't that what this conversation is all about anyway?
Fortunately, I think we got a couple more days at least. I don't know.
Jim Morrison turned on his head there.
The end, my friend.
It is the end. It's the end of the first 2 hours and the start of the third hour.
Have we already been all this time on the? Wow, yeah.
A long time ago, I read this book, Twilight of the American Culture. The author is Morris Berman, and I was just um, thinking about it because of what Cornfed said about what can we do while we're in the plantation or in the concentration camp. And he had a concept there. He was saying either escape America, or if you can't, then adopt the monastic option. But I can't exactly remember what that all entails. So I will read that book and I will report back to the group if I find something of value. I think he was just thinking about how to have a creative life or how to survive and live a life maybe inside this culture if you can't escape it, you know, kind of like what Cornfed was saying about being in the concentration camp but still surviving and I don't know, finding some maybe moments of peace, something like that.
Morris Berman is a brilliant bloke. I highly recommend. Yeah, follow the name. He's a really great writer. He hates Americans so much. He's so derisory about people, which I really enjoy. I think he lives in Mexico now, doesn't he? He's just
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, I think I mentioned one of his books before, where he examines the origins of religion.
Yeah, I have those books, but I haven't had time to read them. He does describe himself as an accelerationist, that the faster America collapses, the better it will be for everyone. At least that's what he thinks.
Yeah, I don't think you'll find anyone here who doesn't agree.
Oh,
As an
come
American,
on.
yeah.
Don't you love us?
Well, we're hot on your tails, so the faster you guys go, the faster we're going. And I,
It
for
will be
one,
at the center of the vortex here.
yeah,
Pull everyone in.
well, I think they're going to take us, out. They're going to try and take us out. They're doing that to the Europeans now, aren't they? And I don't know whether Great Britain, in inverted commas, stands, but they're going to take out Europe, and then whether Britain gets to be the little, I think of Britain in relation to United States like that little creature that sort of jumps up and down on Jabba the Hutt in the Return of the Jedi. Is it? There's a little squeaky creature, and I think of Britain as the little pet of the United States that's gonna might be dragged along a little bit while they destroy Europe and then they destroy Britain afterwards. I don't know. So yeah,
Britain just taunts Europe while America has all the bombs.
Yeah, something like that probably.
Collapse now and avoid the rush is the James Michael Greer quote in the chat right now. It's a great chat. Great quote.
It's such a t-shirt. Yeah, it really is a great line.
So I wrote in the chat in this app to maybe invite this young student in Just Stop Oil Norway. Is that something people are interested in, or should we just leave it? I'm okay with both. You decide.
I mentioned before, but it sounds like fun. I don't know. Open to it.
Any naysayers? Mike, are you heavily against it, or sort of slightly against it, or just nervous about it? I guess he was nervous about it because it disappeared. Anyone else who is against? It's okay to be against.
What? Sorry, I missed that because I was busy chatting. What's your question, GS?
Yeah, my question was this young 24-year-old master student of philosophy who got into trouble in the Norwegian media this week for saying that he might be inclined to do sabotage for the climate and for the planet in the future. I was suggesting, or asking you guys rather, to try to get him on this show as a guest, or a special guest or something next week. And we have including me, we have 3 people who thinks that is okay proposition. And I think MD was against, and it just disappeared. So I don't know. But what do you think?
What would the reason for objection be?
I think Mike said that we would attract attention from the usual spooks or security people, but I think that train left a long time ago for this quote.
Okay, yeah, I don't know about that. I suppose, yeah, I understand people's reservation if that's the case. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a strong view. I don't know all of this. I remember when I was in India way back when, hanging around Tibetans that there was this sort of vague acknowledgement that the Chinese spooks had a file on you if you spent a couple of days in that community, and that seemed quite titillating at the time. But I don't know really. Are they listening and watching? There was, Hugh was always very, had very strong feelings about, security and all of this, and I'm never really sure what the parameters are. But it's one of those things that as soon as if you discuss it in too much depth, then that seems to be almost, what is it? It's self-referential, isn't it? If you start talking about what the parameters of discussion are, then you're getting into the discussion that you're not sure about the parameters of. And then you read that page on Deep Green Resistance about security culture, and that's even more opaque.
I think we can be pretty sure that they are listening, but like maybe one or two young new recruits.
There's a
in
robot
some of the
somewhere.
services.
Yeah, but those new recruits might be looking to get a promotion, and who knows? I mean,
Yeah, but it's like if some people in Norway listen to it, and some people in the UK, and maybe some people in Germany because of the pipeline blow up thing.
Yeah,
I don't. I just don't think. Having this master student on, who was recently on the most prominent debate show on Norwegian television, it's kind of like, he's already been on there. He didn't say anything very radical.
yeah.
He might do something illegal a decade into the future. What's the big deal? So
yeah,
I think it's interesting to talk to him. Maybe we could get him to calm down a bit, because like in my own view, there's no point to doing, or there's no possibility to saving the climate situation as I see it. How would he react to that kind of proposition? Maybe just being 24 years old, having a really busy life, means that he cannot. He hasn't had time to really look into feedback loops that makes it more or less impossible to stop this freight train. I think it's a lot of interesting content to come from such a conversation with him. I don't think we will get on some terrorist non-flight list or something for doing it, but I'm open to people who don't want it, and I'm also a lazy person, so if you don't want me to spend a lot of energy trying to make it happen, I'm fine with that too.
Laziness
say
is
so.
a true revolution, Torstein. I suppose that my view is that if you don't explicitly talk about, again, I suppose the thing is, what's the trick about talking hypothetically about scenarios? I remember that there was a conversation with you and Hugh where you talked about some fairly dicey stuff, quite an old one, and then you went, "Oh, this is about my novel." Well, I'm talking about my novel, and I'm thinking, well, that's not going to fly. And
that was while both he and I were writing a climate novel, and he finished it before me. So yeah, it's like you can never really talk to a writer, because you don't know if he's talking fiction or real life. And
the thing is, like, if somebody decided to come and get you, then that's not going to fly. You don't stand a chance with that. As in, if you then found yourself discussing, what really shocked me was back when there were riots in England a few years ago, and anybody who expressed any sympathy or understanding for why riots might occur, without even people who didn't say, yeah, there should be riots or whatever, the people were rounded up at that time for even like talking about the possibility there may be a reason for there to be riots. People were rounded up for enticement. So I guess that's the one reservation I have about these sort of conversations is whether, you know, at some point we are going to be rounded up. You know, I think it's a matter of time in the UK before there are work camps. So these immigrants now who are all locked in these like terrible detention centres will end up being put to work, and the general public go, yeah, right, yeah, these people came over here and they're all living in hotels, blah, 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 and they should be put to work. So they'll be sent down like whatever, the Cornwall reopened tin mines or whatever they're going to do in their desperation. And then slowly that'll feed out to people on unemployment benefits. They'll be put to work. There'll be work camps, work makes you free, and so on. And the people will support it, and eventually 80% of the population will be in work camps. So I guess that's sort of coming, and any of the people who've done anything even remotely dodgy or said anything remotely dodgy, then there'll be a sort of computer system, AI system will be set up, and somebody will go, right, okay, anybody who said anything dodgy is going in this category, and they'll work down the list so that, you know, all the Just Stop Oil people, anybody who sprayed paint on an oil company building, or anybody who held up the M25 or whatever, or you know, whatever, they'll be on, you know, the A list, and they'll be rounded up. And then anybody who said, I quite like some of the stuff that Roger Hallam said, or I once watched a Roger Hallam video more than 10 minutes, will be on the B list, and they'll be rounded up afterwards, you know, and they'll work their way down the list until there's no one left, right, except for the like people.
Yeah.
Kensington.
Well, I've had meetings. I've had meetings with the spooks back in Norway. You know, after my first novel came out, everybody in the security business just loved my first novel. I don't know why. So we had like 3 meetings. They paid for my coffee. I was quite poor at that time. So we had 3 meetings over like a year, and they just figured out, oh, this guy is really, really boring. He hasn't got anything interesting going on. I think we just leave it. You know, it's like the most boring guy in southern Norway. So yeah.
Yeah,
But I think they caught on to me because I released a novel about stuff.
And they interviewed you. You were actually spoken to. Is this something we can discuss?
It was very, very boring. Interestingly, relating to you, who was in Greece, I remember they asked me on the very first date. We were sitting on the edge of a basin, you know, a water basin thing, in the sun, and they were asking me, "Oh, yeah, anarchism. That's interesting, Torstein. So, do you have any contacts with anarchists in Greece?" And this was like, you know, 10, 15 years ago. So, whatever, 10 years ago. So very strange interview. But,
so they'll be dragging you off to the work camp before me then, Torstein.
No, they found me so boring, so incredibly boring, and so I don't know. You know, when you're intellectual and talks about stuff instead of doing stuff. So I was totally the wrong guy to sort of have in their aims, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that reminds me of my old self-defense when I was younger, of talking a lot. And when you talk a lot, they leave you alone.
Yeah, basically they leave you alone if you talk a lot, because if you actually are a good saboteur, you shut the fuck up, you know.
I wouldn't know. I have no idea.
Of course you wouldn't know.